call upon Mr. Steve Pappas as the first speaker in favor of the motion. Just leave it in the stand for a work better. There you go.
So to start out, since the beginning speaker, I'd like to just start out by stating that in terms of many presidents, no matter what president it may be, every president has issues that, when faced, are truly difficult, and President Obama is no exception. So in terms of President Obama, we as a people have to look at his economic policies, to really look at what his need and his most difficult problems are going to be facing over this entire administration. So what I've heard from many constituents is, in terms of the president's situation, in terms of what he puts out there and how he really focuses on the economy, why should we be helping people who don't have their own house in order? So for instance, the president is looking at the entire country as a whole, not piecemeal. So for instance, if I keep my own house in order, why should I help my neighbor? But we as a country need to work as a whole, and the president recognizes that. And that's been something that's been evident in his entire economic policy. So to start out, in terms of, let me go towards fiscal responsibility. Now, the president may have inherited this deficit, but that's no excuse. The president needs to work on the deficit and work hard on the deficit. That's why he's put forward a pay-as-you-go suggestion towards the Senate, and also recently has been very forward with the Senate and asking that they reinstate
Point of order. Point of order.
Point of information.
If President Obama is doing so well, after $1 trillion, where are the jobs?
Well, in terms of the jobs, you're talking specifically overall or on a
Unemployment's at
specific?
10.5%, highest it's ever been since the Great Depression. After $1 trillion that President Obama said we would have everybody out here working, where are the jobs?
Well, one point for that to answer is in terms of the jobs for New York State to start out with. Let's talk about the American Recovery and Investment Act, which he pushed forward through the House and also the Senate. 43,000 jobs to date in New York State. 599,000 jobs nationally, and that's just being reported as of thought.
Point of order. In the state of New York, point of information. In the state of New York, we're at 10.5%. When you go into certain pockets of New York City, you're looking at 25 to 30%. North of where we are right now tonight, 30%. I don't know where these 40,000 jobs are coming from, but all I know, if you talk to the average New Yorker, there are no jobs on the street. Where are the jobs?
Where the jobs are, what you can do is if you go to recovery.gov, because in terms of the government's transparency about the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the reporting shows exactly where the projects are, where the money's been allocated, and also where the jobs are being reported. Now, that doesn't even include, for instance, we're in the town of Haverstraw. That includes the Stony Point and Haverstraw School District. $1.5 million from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act went towards those schools. And those jobs were not lost. So not only were jobs created in New York State, but jobs were saved in New York State as well.
Point of information, the only jobs that have been saved with this investment act have been Patterson and the dysfunctional bureaucrats in Albany, because they haven't sent any money out to Haverstraw, New York City, Buffalo, or anywhere else, because they're out of control and they haven't done a darn thing to help anybody. There are no jobs from this whole stimulus package, and President Obama, all he's talked about for 1 year, has been taking over health care. Where are the jobs?
Let Mr. Pappas continue, please. Mr. Pappas.
Surely. In terms of that, I believe I already fully answered where the jobs are located from that website. So, just to clarify, I believe I've answered the point of information.
I have a point of information, if possible. Just on topic, you mentioned that it's important for people to help those who may not
to return back towards what I was talking about for the budget in terms of a pay-as-you-go budget. We don't have the money, we don't put the program in place. That's what the president has been talking about and trying to push forward through not just the House, but also the Senate as well. So that is one of the points that he would like to make. And in terms of what further the president would like to see is also that this $1.3 trillion deficit that we have, he would also like to see spending freeze, complete spending freeze in discretionary funding
Point
as
of
well.
information, isn't that supposed to be in a year from now, the spending freeze, not now?
Correct.
Can you explain why that would be in a year from now and not now?
In terms of the current year, we're still in the current funding year. So that would have to take into effect in any further legislation that would be put forward.
You
Answer?
can continue.
Sure.
I don't know if that was answered or not.
Okay. And then in terms of what the president would like to see further in terms of spending is to encourage economic growth. So let me move on to my next point, not just on the budget, but also in terms of what he's done to help the fellow Americans. Because if, going back to that getting the house in order, for instance, let's talk about the Making Home Affordable program. So let's say one of us in here lost our job, went into foreclosure. That does not help our neighborhoods. That hinders our neighborhoods. Let's ask a few questions here. Home goes into foreclosure. What goes through the minds of the neighborhood? What happens to my property values? Who mows the lawn for aesthetics reasons? What happens if there's a back bond coming through and someone homeless takes shelter there? Those are real issues that our local towns need to address if someone goes into foreclosure. And then you have someone who had a home who's also in foreclosure,
Point of
who's homeless.
information, if the people have a job and there's more jobs, then the house won't go into foreclosure. By going into fixing the problem, we're going from the wrong end.
I'm sorry, where was the
We
question?
gotta keep, the question is, why would you think, shouldn't we be looking at creating jobs so that people don't go into foreclosure rather than going in after the problem and they lost their job and then went into foreclosure? What do you think about that?
Oh, surely. No, in terms of that question, what I would say is we are in an economic crisis now. We need to address these problems because down the road, these are the jobs that we're trying to create. But we can't.
2 minutes.
Okay, just to finish answering the question. Now, in terms of going back end, obviously, ideally, we would not want to have a Making Home Affordable program. We would want to make sure that every American would not go into foreclosure and we wouldn't have to address those issues. But the problem is that is an issue that we're faced with, and you know what? The president is making sure to go from every end at it, making sure to look at every single situation and making sure not to forget any American, because these are the real issues that we in the local community are facing. So we need to address them. We can't just say, what about these jobs that we're creating? We need to also know that this crisis is something that's been brewing for decades. It is not something that just came up today. This is something that we have to look at in terms of our spending. We also have to look at what we're doing to get these jobs out there. Now, in terms of where this problem originated from, obviously it didn't just come up right when the president took into office. So that's why, as a president, he needs to work hard at seeing what the root problems are. So you can't just sit and say, I'm going to do this one program to create jobs, but not address the Americans that are falling on hard times. So we as a community need to realize that we're a community. So we can't just ignore those Americans, and the president's been very good at that, making sure to address every single issue at hand. He's been criticized for saying he's doing too much. Doing too much, that is not an issue. Working hard is not an issue. We as Americans know that, and the president has worked hard in trying to push forward his agenda, working with the Senate, working with the House of Representatives, working with the states, trying to make sure that we push forward and address these issues. Because just sitting on our hands saying, where are these jobs, what's happening?
The term of the honorable gentleman is expired.